Is there a place that feels safe, inside, outside, between? And what that does is you're essentially disarming an overactive nervous system or security system, one that's like alarm, alarm, alarm. And there might be danger, right? There might be danger, but oftentimes it's just the past that's laying this filter over the present. And so we can get kind of wired to not even notice what we call glimmers, these safety cues rather than triggers.
Welcome to the Happiness and Progress podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Craig. I'm an Emmy Award-winning journalist, international speaker, mom, wife, and you know what I like to say, just a person looking for more joy in the everyday. I think this is going to be a pretty eye-opening conversation and leave you with some things to practice and places to go to get more information. But first, let me introduce you to today's guest. Today, you're going to be hearing from Britt Piper. She's an internationally renowned speaker, author, somatic experiencing practitioner, and she's an expert in sexual violence prevention and trauma-informed care. We're going to start with basics. Let's start with some definitions. What is somatic healing?
Yeah. So soma means of the body. So essentially, there are different kinds of, modalities of somatic therapy, but I am specifically trained in a modality called somatic experiencing. So I'm a somatic experiencing practitioner, and in short, we call it SE. But SE is a naturalistic trauma recovery modality that takes a body first approach. So essentially, we work with body memory to heal trauma rather than verbal memory.
And a lot of us are used to that verbal memory, like especially me. I spend a lot of time, let me logic my way out of this trauma. But what is the difference when you take that body first approach?
Yeah. So I think it could be helpful to kind of just give a lay of the land of like what the definition of trauma is, and it can get really confusing. So I like the idea of keeping it simple. Yes. Trauma can be defined as any experience that overwhelms the nervous system's capacity to cope. When that happens, your nervous system, think of it like armor. You armor up and your nervous system automatically, right? The autonomic nervous system, it automatically armors up to protect you in either fight, flight, shut down, freeze, fawn, functional freeze. And I explain all of these in the book. But what can happen is that if you have an experience that's too overwhelming, then your nervous system can remain armored up. And so we can get chronically stuck in these survival states, commonly referred to as survival mode. And over time, it's like this night suit of armor that you're wearing starts to almost become like a personality, but it doesn't feel inherent or, natural to who you are. And so a lot of clients that I work with, people that I've worked with over the years, they'll come to me with that expression of, I feel stuck in my life. And I just, I'm stuck in these patterns. I'm stuck in this emotional landscape. I'm stuck with these symptoms. I'm stuck with these thoughts. How can I get unstuck? And it's the nervous system that really guides and informs all of those things in our life. So when we get unstuck from survival mode, all of those things can really change for the better.
I love that definition of trauma. I think sometimes, you talk about this a little bit. Sometimes you're like, oh, well, I didn't go through that or that or that. So my trauma, I'm fine. But it's good to recognize what's happened in your life that your nervous system was not capable of dealing with.
Exactly. And it's interesting too, because I think we have such this big idea of like what trauma is, right? Kind of like you're talking about. And the people that come into my program called the Body First Healing Program, and the clients that I work with, they're like, okay, I know I've experienced this trauma, right? This big catastrophic thing that we all think is trauma, or I have all these signs and symptoms that I've experienced something that's really dysregulating or something traumatic, but I don't remember, right?
Yeah.
Going through trauma. And so part of that is either that their perception of trauma is a little off, and it's less about the event and more so about how the nervous system experienced it. So like in our mind, we might logically be like, well, that wasn't traumatic, right? But the body and the nervous system felt like it was. So that's why, again, we focus on the body. So that's number one. And then number two, oftentimes we don't remember a lot of our traumatic experiences because the memory centers in the brain, you can kind of think of it this way, like they disconnect. And that's kind of the brain's like beautiful way of protecting us from some of that traumatic memory. So it can become dissociated from our
Mm-hmm.
conscious, recollection. And so the memory might come back kind of blurry or fragmented, or it might come back as what we call a flashback, flashbulb memory or flooding, right? So some people, wow, I'm flooded with memory out of nowhere. So although we might not remember what happened, the nervous system in the body still remembers how it felt.
Mm,
And the
yeah.
great thing about somatic work is working with body memory, that starts to form even in the womb. So we do a lot of like trauma in utero, birth trauma, essentially pre-verbal trauma. So in your first 3 years of life, somatic work can work with that body memory as well, even though, again, there's no conscious recollection.
Right. Okay. I wanted to read this from the book. I had flagged this because I love this, and I think some of my listeners have read "The Body Keeps the Score." You know, we talk about those kinds of things. So there's some idea of our body is keeping record of what's occurring to us throughout our lives. But I loved this, how you described this. Quote, as you'll come to deeply understand in this chapter, trauma leaves all of us with indelible imprints that can continue to haunt us, regardless of whether or not we can consciously recall it all. Although the memory centers of your brain may not have been present to witness the suffering, the body was always there to feel, sense, impulsively react, and experience it all. In other words, you might not remember what happened, but your body still remembers how it felt. And when reminded of or triggered by these somatic imprints or felt memories, your body instinctually refers to the ancient wisdom of your nervous system's reaction at that time: fight, flight, shut down, freeze, or fawn. I thought that was said so well. I'm going to ask you in a second. I'm going to ask you about, okay, then how do we even get started if we don't remember all the things our body's gone through? But first, while we're talking about trauma and the definition of, I want to talk, we're both we have backgrounds of journalism. You were a
Mm,
photojournalist. I was
yeah.
a reporter for a long time. And some of the things that I witnessed were just like shocking. And they call it secondary trauma. As I've talked about this with people, they call it secondary trauma. But as I've thought about it and sat with it, while it might not have been my family members, whose screams I heard, or like it wasn't my parent who was lost or my sibling who was murdered or whatever, witnessing those, I don't feel like my nervous system had the capacity to deal with that. So it kind of just seems like trauma, like trauma is trauma.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I love knowing that we kind of come from that similar
Yeah.
background so that we can kind of speak that same language. Yeah, secondary trauma. I also like to refer to it as vicarious trauma. And I do a lot of trauma informed trainings, and I work a lot with first responders, the
Mm,
military, violent crimes units, and half of the programs that I do as a trauma educator with those groups are either we're talking about how to support survivors and victims in a way that's trauma informed, right?
mhm.
Knowing about how trauma lives in the body, that's really important for investigations and things like that. And, working with someone who comes in through the emergency room doors and knowing how to help them regulate their system. But then the other half of the programs are this community of people feel really traumatized.
Yeah.
'Cause yes, they witnessed it, and that's a lot of what vicarious trauma is that you can find that through essentially heart coherence, or what we call transference, if you are regularly exposed to trauma and your nervous system doesn't have that baseline or the capacity to really hold that trauma, then you will start to carry on the same symptoms of the trauma as if you experienced it yourself. So we
Oh
see
my gosh.
a lot. Yeah. So a lot of the trainings I do with first responders, and again, sex crimes detectives, victims crimes units. A lot of it is that secondary vicarious. How do we tend to ourselves and our system to create a better capacity within, so that we're not just showing up for the people that we are helping in these helping professions, but we're also showing up for ourselves. That's good knowledge for therapists, for teachers and educators, right, who see trauma walk through their doors every single day. Yeah, really, really important.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't think the disassociation is working.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I as a photojournalist, that's why I stepped away.
Mm.
is because it was just too hard for me. And I could tell that I was tending to other people's pain before I was tending to my own. And I think I even mentioned in the book, like I had to go all the way to the other side of the world to run away from my own stuff, right? To help other
Hmm.
people. Yet here I was as someone working, in a rape crisis center in South Africa. I'd leave work every night and I'd go to my Airbnb by myself and I'd drink an entire bottle of wine, and so on the outside, it's like, wow, look at Brittany doing this incredible work. But I was in such a low place. And that's because to be quite honest, I didn't have any business being there yet. I hadn't done my
Yeah.
own work. So yeah, and that was what, 10 years ago now, 10, 12 years ago. So
I think we have a lot of helpers who listen to the podcast and in all various there's a lot of trauma out there that we just witness and that's challenging.
mhm.
Um okay, I promised that we would go back to talk about
Well, I
what
was,
were
I
you
was
going
going
to
to
say?
say, you brought up Bessel's book, and of course, I have The Body Keeps the Score, like right here.
Yeah.
It's chewed up by my child. You see the bite marks on it. This book is incredible. I know for some people it's really heavy, and it also is science heavy. But one of the things that Bessel says in the book is that trauma doesn't come back as a story or a memory; it comes back as a reaction. And in the little part that you read from the book, which by the way, it's so cool hearing you read the book back. That's like a first for me
You
hearing
wrote that.
it loud. I know I wrote that. Yeah, it's just really cool hearing someone read it. But just the whole concept that trauma doesn't necessarily always come back as a memory, it comes back as a reaction. The reaction that he's talking about is the reactions of the body, the nervous system, the trauma responses, the ways that when someone raises their voice at us, right, and we start to collapse our shoulders, and then our stomach drops, and all of a sudden we feel flush in our face. That is body memory. That is
Mhm.
muscle memory. That is what we call procedural memory. And that's the reaction of the body, that is this memory from the past that's showing up here in the present. And so in the somatic world, we work with those reactions and helping the body and the nervous system to create new impulses, new reactions, which can be easier said than done, of course. But yeah, just wanted to mention that quote.
That's yes, that's what we were going to come back to. So what is the importance of noticing, okay, you're having that body reaction? Is it important to say, "Oh, let me figure out where this is coming from. Let me go back to birth and revisit that this must have happened in birth?" Or do we just deal with the reaction of our body?
Yeah. It's not necessary. I like to
Mm.
always say that remembering is not the same thing as recovering.
Mm.
And we've kind of been taught the opposite, right? We've been taught that we
Yes.
like need to go into, I always use the analogy of a pool, like in traditional conventional therapy, and I was in and out of therapy for the majority of my life. You get thrown into the deep end, right? The deep end of trauma. Let's talk about it. Let's dig it all up. Let's explore it. But that's not necessary, because when we're working with body memory, again, what we're doing is there doesn't have to be content with it. And I think it's important to note that the nervous system doesn't operate from the conscious cortical cognitive thinking part of the brain, which is that top brain, that neocortex. The nervous system lives, or is housed in the subconscious brain, so below the conscious brain, which is our emotional brain in the middle, which is the limbic system, and the reptilian brain, the brain stem at the bottom. And this is where impulse and sensation live. So that is what somatics is. It's the language of the nervous system, which is emotion, feeling, sensation, impulse. That's what we work with. And the great news is that I'll give an example to you. Let's say, in my experience, I had a pretty brutal attack that I survived, and my nervous system was overwhelmed in that experience. I did try to physically fight back, but I was overpowered. And so for the 2 years following that event, I became incredibly angry. And that wasn't really in like my normal gentle nature. Um,
Mhm.
I was like soft, kind Brittany. So when people are like, what's going on with Britt? And then I ended up in a jail cell because of a violent incident. People were really like, what the hell is wrong with Britt? And so that was my nervous system again, stuck in that fight response and trying to complete that experience. It was stuck in this loop of, I need to fight back. I need to fight back. And so we call that a trauma reenactment. And so in my case, if I were working with me as a somatic experiencing practitioner, I would not go straight into, okay, let's go back to that experience in the past where you wanted to fight back. What does your body want to do right now? Instead, we work what we call the outer edges of the trauma vortex. At the middle of the trauma vortex, the middle of that tornado is the trauma. We don't go there. We go the outer edges. So we take people into the shallow end.
Mhm.
So that might look like, hey, what's a moment recently that like kind of pissed you off? Maybe not trauma related. Well, so and so didn't respond to my text message. And it made, I don't know, it just really frustrated me. Yeah. And as you're saying that, what do you notice in your body? It's like, oh, I'm noticing that I feel kind of hot and there's like a buzzing in my chest and like my jaw is clenching a little bit right now. And it's like, can we be with that? And can we see what happens next? And maybe it turns into, oh, I actually just really want to stand up and like pace around. It's like, okay, yeah, your body's kind of in a fight response. Can we allow that to be here? And so we see what naturally happens with the body. Maybe it turns into eventually tears or heat or sweat, which is what we call discharging. This is the body taking the adrenaline and cortisol of these survival responses and expelling it or, releasing, discharging it from the body. And so we do that and we go in just a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper over time. And we might end up getting to that moment where I wanted to fight back and I couldn't during that attack. But it's not necessary because we're still just working with the body. We're still expelling and discharging all of those stuck hormones. And you can do that without having to go back into the trauma.
Okay, so we can heal by being presently with our body, not necessarily revisiting, talking. I mean, this is, like we said, not talk therapy, like talking it out, going on that, which a lot of us are used to. Instead, the healing actually does occur when we are experiencing those, like the body sensations, and we're letting them
Well,
discharge. Is that what you
yeah,
called it?
exactly. Yeah, we're letting them discharge, and we're trying to allow the body to have a different experience now. So we always ask the question, like, is there something your body wants to do right now? And maybe what we won't add at the end is that it couldn't do back then. So for people who've experienced like abuse in childhood, they probably couldn't fight back or flee. And so their nervous system probably got really comfortable in that state of kind of shut down and freeze, right? Because as a little child, fighting back or fleeing could have put you in more danger. And so
Mhm.
that shows up today in your life as you might be a chronic people pleaser. You might make yourself small. You might attract relationships where they're very controlling and demanding, right? And so instead, it's, hey, that moment that you wanted to set that boundary and advocate for yourself, like, what does that feel like in your body right now? Well, I feel my chest puffing up. Yeah. And what is it that you think you might have wanted to like say? And so in a session, they might say that, or they might just, yeah, I might say, hey, I'm noticing as you're telling me about this that so today I had a couple sessions today and I noticed my client was crossing their hands and I could tell even on the Zoom screen, I said, did you just cross your legs? And she said, yeah. And I said, I see your arms are crossed. Where are your hands at? And she said, they're tucked between my legs right now. I said,
Mm.
yeah, so there's a little bit of hiding. Can we notice that? And she's like, yeah. And I said, is there anything maybe that your body wants to do that feels, that maybe it hasn't been able to do in the past? And she's like, well, actually, I'm kind of tempted to like take my hands out of my legs and just open up my chest a little bit. And I'm like, yeah, let's do that. Would that be okay? And so she did it. And immediately you see the body kind of open up and she goes, oh, wow. Right. And so it's like she's now taking up space. And so the body just gets, and again, this is procedural patterns or muscle memory. The
Mhm.
body just gets so stuck in these patterns. And so just working with the body and kind of like teasing out these patterns and giving it a new option or a new choice, it helps us to break out of those cycles.
You mentioned you had gone to, you ended up in a jail cell, and I loved what the judge had said to you, and I just can't remember it, so I wanna ask you what she or he said.
Yeah, she said to me, we're going to drop the charges, but you need to learn to live with your pain better. Live with,
Mm.
yeah. You
Um,
don't have to get over it or get past it. She said, live with it, which
yeah, and I
concept for me.
I mean, really, I think that's an idea that a lot of us are like clinging to, like, let me just keep on trying to just get over it, get past it, but to live with it. So does this help you? Like, healing isn't getting past it.
Yeah. We
Healing
cannot
is living with it.
Yeah, it's more so about how can I get to a place where I now have a capacity to be with it rather than run from it, avoid it. And let's say it's grief, right? It's not that the grief is too big, it's that our capacity to be with the grief is too small, right? And it's only like that, and that's what we call emotional resilience or nervous system resilience. That capacity is only going to grow and expand by us gently touching into the grief and then finding that it's okay, I could handle that, and then coming back out and then doing it
Mhm.
again, right? So we do it in a very gentle way. And again, it's not throwing you into the deep end, but it's just dipping our toes in and showing our body that we can handle this, right? And that starts
Yeah.
to grow that nervous system muscle, if you will.
So as we have this conversation, I'm like, okay, I am ready to like, let's do this nervous system work. I'm afraid of the entire world.
Yeah.
I see the world as such a threat, and I know that I'm spending too much time in fight or flight. This has actually been like a big focus for me recently. So
Mhm.
to get out of this space. So for me and anyone listening who's like, okay, yes, first step. What is that?
Yeah. So, threat is the big word, right? So you can kind of think of your nervous system. I love analogies because this doesn't have to be a big complex topic. Like I think it's so important for people to simplify, and sometimes we get too big in the science, but think of your nervous system like a security system. So it's always working in the background of your life. In other words, it's working through your subconscious and it works through the body and the senses. So it's always sensing into your environment for, am I safe? Am I not safe? Am I safe? Am I not safe? And we call this neuroception. Neuroception was a term that was created by Dr. Stephen Porges. He's the developer of the polyvagal theory, which is like the upgraded science of the nervous system. So I was also trained at the Polyvagal Institute, which is why I focus so much on that in the book as well. But neuroception is essentially detection without our mind's awareness, how our subconscious brain and our body work together to detect for threat or safety without our mind knowing it's happening. So this happens like millions of scans per second. But neuroception happens in three places. So number one, it happens inside our body. So at all times, we're like sensing and scanning like, am I safe in my body? Am I not? So that might be like, oh, my stomach is really upset right now, or oh, my digestive system is like really upset, or oh, I actually feel at ease today. Safe, not safe. So inside our body. Second is outside in our environments. Kind of what you're talking about here is like the world does not feel safe.
Mhm.
It's like danger, danger, danger. Am I safe? Am I not safe? And then third is between you and other nervous systems. So your system is always scanning the nervous systems around you for signs of welcome, like kind eyes, or like prosody in the voice, which is like the up and down, like baby talk and doggy talk.
Mhm.
Um, or that feels safe, or is it not safe, which is like I'm talking to you like this right now, which is a really flat tone, which does not feel very welcoming, right? So
Mhm.
welcome or warning. So in short, we call this scanning inside, outside, between. Inside your body, outside, and between you and others. And the great thing is that even though this is a subconscious thing that happens, we can intentionally bring it back to our conscious awareness. So like what we practice a lot in the Body First Healing program and in the book is tracking every single day. So what we do is we track what's something that feels safe right now in my environment. So it might just be something as simple as really leaning into the sensory motor system and being like, I'm noticing right now, like the way that there's reflections in my bookshelves over here on the glass doors, and I'm seeing kind of like a glistening of the sun. And oh, there's a picture of me and my husband and my dog when she was really young. And oh, she was really cute as a puppy. Now she's like almost 10 years old. And there's some incense that actually I would love to like light here soon. And so, but I noticed that as I was just doing that, I just took a deep breath.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So a lot of times we refer to somatic work as like stupid simple because people are like, there's no way this works. But like just yesterday, I was in a call in our group program, and someone said, "This one thing has changed in my life, and it's something I've struggled with for 6 years." And she's like, "And I don't even know when it happened, but like I'm not struggling with it anymore." And it was such a subtle change.
Hmm.
That's kind of what somatic work does, is just by little moments of noticing things that feel safe, whether it's outside in our environment with another person or another living thing. So co-regulation is great. So whether it's with kids, your partner, family, friends, FaceTime, animals, like petting your pet, right? That can be really regulating. And that's why so many, just talking about people who work in the helping professions, a lot of detectives have emotional support animals, like a lot of
Mm.
canine support animals. And then lastly is that inside channel. So you can also track internally, like if the environment that you're in does not feel safe, or if there's people around that don't feel safe, you can ask the question, is there a place in my body right now that feels easier to be with? And maybe that's just like my chest feels okay. Like my stomach is in knots, my head is swirling, but my chest feels a little bit more stable. Or I'm noticing the weight of my sit bones in the seat,
Hmm.
or my legs feel calm, even though my upper body is really activated right now. So those are some of the things that you can start to do is there a place that feels safe, inside, outside, between? And what that does is you're essentially disarming an overactive nervous system or security system, one that's like alarm, alarm, alarm. And there might be danger, right? There might be danger, but oftentimes it's just the past that's laying
Hmm.
this filter over the present. And so we can get kind of wired to not even notice what we call glimmers, these safety cues rather than triggers.
The past is laying over the present. Oh my goodness. That
Yeah.
is totally, um, I've expressed that, but not in such an eloquent way, that is what's going on. When you start to do this, what is the change that you start experiencing as you go through
Mhm.
kind of making, like, healing that trauma, healing that as you deal with the feelings of your body? What's the change that you see in your life?
I think one of the biggest things that maybe confuses people, so it's always important to like just state this from the beginning, is that it almost feels like our perspective is, "Oh, I'm feeling worse right now before I get better." And a lot of that reason is because as you start to do a lot of somatic and nervous system work, you're really becoming reconnected with parts of your body that have maybe been shut down. Parts of us that we have warred against, that we've resisted. I don't want this anger to be here. I don't want this grief to be here. I don't want this pain. I don't want this fear. So we've gotten really good, especially in this modern world that we live in like pushing stuff down, suppressing it, packing it away, throwing it under the rug. And so this work is really about reconnecting with those parts of you that have felt like too much to be with in the past. And so naturally, what happens is the things that have been pushed down and dissociated from the body, they start to emerge. So, like, you might start to feel anxiety and you're like, where is this coming from? Or you might start to feel like anger, or you might start to feel sadness, or even symptoms like insomnia, or wow, I'm having like oftentimes it's my jaw has been really tense lately. My shoulders, I've been getting these kind of migraines. And what this is, you can kind of think of it this way: when we shut down things, we're essentially in kind of like a freeze. And think of it like you're thawing the body out. It's like your body is saying, I feel like I have the capacity now to not just feel and process, but to hold and contain that which felt like too much back then.
Hmm.
And so that's why in the somatic space, we don't go straight into trauma because we know that it's already going to be activating enough. And so the foundational work is building up what we call those resources, which are the cues of safety. So you kind of build like your own toolbox and you figure out what helps my system to feel supported, safe, and resourced. Maybe it's co regulation. Maybe it's being out in nature. Maybe it's orienting through the senses, as I was saying, and you get really good at practicing that. Like that becomes a skill that becomes almost like second nature to you. And by the way, it should be, right? So as you do that, you'll notice that your body naturally starts to, it's like, again, these things thaw out. And it's like your body's saying, oh, we have tools now. We can face this. So
Mm.
yeah, it kind of confuses people at first, but it never feels overwhelming. And so it's really just a process of allowing the body to move through that which has been really suppressed. So I would say that's probably one of the big things that I always like to tell people, and not to scare them away. And it's funny because in my Body First Healing program, it's a 6-month program. We actually don't even get into core wounds or trauma work until month 3.
Wow.
Yeah. Some people love that. Some people hate that because they're like, let's go. I want to do it right now. But what's interesting is that you find is that once you get to month 3, you're like, oh, this doesn't feel like too much. And that's because like you've been putting in a lot of the foundational work to really support your system so that when you get to kind of that trauma vortex, it doesn't like swipe you away or take you away with it. So yeah, I'd say that's one thing that's
Yeah.
big to know.
I really love that. And I already basically said this, but I love that with this work, it's not just because I'm such an overthinker, analyzer, logic, type A, like I just want to type A my way through this.
Mhm.
Um, it's probably a
A
traumatic,
whole conversation about that. Yeah.
probably have another whole episode about that. But anyway, yeah, I love that. I love that we're paying attention to the feeling part of this. Highly recommend your book. Absolutely loved it. And I will put the link in show notes. Before I let you go, I want to ask you one more question, which I ask everyone, which is what is your number one tip to finding more joy in the good, the bad, and the in between?
Meeting yourself where you're at. Um, a lot of people like nervous system regulation and somatic healing is such like a trendy topic right now, which I think is so exciting because it's really been on the fringe for so long. So it's an exciting time for us in the space, but a lot of what you see is like the somatic tools and the practices and how to regulate your nervous system. And I think what's the most important above anything else is actually how you relate to yourself.
Mm,
So for instance, like we can do all these tools like shaking my limbs and, air screaming to get out anger and clenching, all these things that you see. However, if our first reaction every time that we experience something that feels difficult in our body is to find a tool to get rid of it, we are just sending, right? Because of like fear or self-criticism or self-judgment or this isn't allowed to be here. We're just sending those subconscious messages to the body that this isn't allowed to be here. And
mm,
so rather than criticism, I always encourage curiosity of like, can we just get curious about what's going on in the body? Rather than trying to fix it, make it go away, your body knows exactly what to do if given the opportunity to just move through it. So that would probably be it, is that don't get too caught up in like the work, and I'm using air quotes here, that you forget that your body is a natural organism with natural responses, and that it knows exactly what to do if you allow it to.
I love that love and grace and trust for the body. I think that's a great place to start. Again, especially for a type A, I want the tools. Britt, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation. The next place to go, if you did, is Britt's book. You can find a link to that in show notes. And if you're loving this episode and if you're loving this podcast, do you think you should subscribe? I do too. So hit the subscribe button and don't forget to leave a rating. Hey, I also just started collecting ratings on Spotify. So go over to, if you're listening on Spotify, give it 5 stars. Thanks so much, and I will see you here next time.